Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chop It Up Sports. Today, we have a very special guest, lifelong best friend of mine, big-time Oregon fan, as you can see, and a JUCO basketball product, Hunter Fullerton. Welcome to Chop It Up. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, how's it going, guys? Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
We got a lot to get into today. We're going to start it off with some Week 9 college football reviews. Not the most entertaining weekend, but there were some very important games that took place on Saturday. And then we're going to finish the second half of the episode up with some NBA talk. Who do we like? Who do we not like this season? And seeing if our beloved Miami Heat can make another deep playoff run. Getting into it, Week 9 in college
Yes,
football
sir.
took place last night. Texas A&M, let's start with them. They pick up a big win over LSU. Kind of a sloppy game for LSU. I had them winning this game in dominant fashion over the Aggies, and it just didn't work out that way. The second half, I felt like Garrett Nussmeier just couldn't find his groove. It really felt like after that first interception that he threw there, it was just downhill from there, and he was pretty rigid. Almost looked like he was second guessing his decision making. When you look at that second half for LSU after being up 10, they go punt, interception, fumble, interception. They finally get a touchdown and then another interception. And that is pretty much their entire second half in a nutshell. You're just not going to win games like that, especially on the road in a place like College Station. And this was an LSU team that was really hot coming into this game. And it kind of seems like they just gave it away to Texas A&M, who I don't think is a great team. But I want to get your thoughts on this game and just kind of what you saw.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure this is a game that Texas A&M won, more of a game that LSU handed them. And it definitely will have serious playoff implications heading forward. So, it was an interesting game, and I expect to see the results of this in the playoffs.
So when you look at Texas A&M, like we both kind of agreed, not a great team, but I mean they put themselves in a position to make that 12-team playoff. They have that early loss to Notre Dame still on their schedule, and it looks like Notre Dame is actually a solid team despite that just disgusting loss to Northern Illinois. Um, how do you think that loss to Notre Dame plays out for Texas A&M the rest of the year? They don't really have a difficult schedule to round it out. They do finish with Texas at home. So that'll be a tough way to close the season. But if they can find a way to beat Texas at home, that puts them in a really good spot to make the SEC championship game and ultimately a good shot at the playoff. But if they do find a way to make a way in, do you really see a way for them to make any noise? Because I personally don't.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you. I think Texas A&M is built to be a subpar or slightly above subpar SEC team. They're physical, they can run the ball, and they have a decent defense. That being said, their quarterback play is below average. I don't think the read that came in afterwards is going to make any big change for them. Obviously, two completions isn't going to get it done as we start moving later into the season. So I think this Texas A&M team is built to be a decent SEC team. They can make some noise. They might sneak their way into the playoffs, but I don't see them having any big implications on the final outlook in the playoffs.
With that being said, the fact that they even have a chance to really be in the SEC championship game is something that I don't think a lot of people expected. I definitely didn't expected, or I didn't definitely didn't expect that. I think when you look at it, I think it's going to be Texas and Georgia again in a rematch. Alabama obviously was front running for a while, but I just don't love what I see from this Alabama team. They look super sloppy to me, and that's not going to win you football games, especially in the Southeastern Conference. Texas and Georgia, that game was pretty weird. Just to hit on that for a second, I had Texas winning that one. I was wrong there too. This SEC conference is just really wide open this year. It feels like week to week it kind of changes in terms of who's the front runner. Who do you like coming out of this conference?
I'm going to stick with the Bulldogs. I think they look like the most complete team against Texas. They showed how dominant their defense was. And I think ultimately it's going to come down to, as long as they don't give away the game, they're going to come out and they're going to be the front runners. I think they're the most complete team. They've stir up the most pressure up front. They have veteran and Carson Beck, and they have quite a few weapons surrounding him. So I just don't see a world where they don't come out atop the SEC, unless, of course, they have a fluke game in the championship and they sort of give it away.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Texas is a team that I've rolled with all year. I really like Quinn Ewers. I like the system he's in. But that Georgia game was just pretty disheartening, to say it at the least. But it just looked like they couldn't find any rhythm. They tried to put Arch in, and Arch is a guy that can use his legs. It feels like a little bit more than Ewers can. But even with that, that Georgia defense was just in his grill all night long, and they just really couldn't get anything going. Speaking of conference favorites, as you can see there, for us, those of you guys watching on YouTube, big Oregon fan, disgusting. But looking at the landscape of the Big Ten, Oregon's the number one team in the country. First time in over 10 years that that's been the case. And it looks like they are the favorite in this Big Ten conference, picking up a big road win, or excuse me, a home win over Illinois this last weekend. Where do you think this Duck team ranks just in terms of the landscape of all of college football?
Yeah, well, trying not to be biased. From what I've seen so far, I truly am not totally sold on a particular team as being the number one team in the country. Like I said, Georgia looks nasty up front, but then at the same time, they sort of have a fluke game against Alabama, hand them a W. I think Oregon so far has looked the most consistent on both sides of the ball. That being said, I sort of question where we're elite. Obviously, we have guys that can create yards after the catch. We're big up front on the defensive end and at the O line. That being said, our defense is good, but our offense hasn't been as explosive as we've seen in years past. So I think overall, Oregon seems to be the most consistent from all fronts. That being said, are they a true number one? I'm not so sure.
Looking at just Oregon's remaining schedule, they don't really have too many tough games. They do have to go to Michigan and Wisconsin, and then they get Maryland and Washington at home. I feel like those are all winnable games, especially for the caliber team that Oregon looks to be this season. Do any of those games scare you? Because when I look at it, I think Michigan, when you looked at that game before the season, you look at that excuse me, and say, wow, that could be a big time matchup. It really just doesn't look like it's going to shake out that way. Michigan just can't get anything going with their passing game, and they're just an abysmal team to watch on both sides of the ball, it seems like. Obviously, Washington, that's a big rivalry game. As much as I would love that game to be close, I don't think that's going to be the case, which is unfortunate because I'm going to be there. And then I think Wisconsin is the one that sticks out to me. I don't think Wisconsin's great, but they're tough to play at home. But you're the diehard here. I want to get your take on if any of these games scare you or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Wisconsin is the scariest game left on our schedule. Excluding a loss this past weekend, Wisconsin seemed to be really gaining some momentum, picking up three big wins in a row against conference opponents. So, of the games left, heading to the Badgers' home, that definitely is a little uncomfortable as an Oregon fan. Outside of that, though, I think going to Ann Arbor, obviously, playing in a place like that is tough. But Michigan's just look so inconsistent on both sides of the ball. I don't see any way they hold Oregon under 20 points, and the way their offenses look this year, I highly doubt that they score more than 20. So Wisconsin's the one opponent left on our schedule that really scares me as we head into start working towards Big Ten championship game.
Looking at this bigger picture of the Big Ten championship game, obviously you guys pick up the big win over Ohio State at home. Do you guys think you get a rematch with them? They haven't looked great last night rather. Not a great game against Nebraska. It looked kind of ugly. Nebraska had a chance there to win it before the Dylan Raiola late interception. And I thought this team was going to look a lot cleaner coming off the bye week. I thought they would look crisp and Ryan Day would have these guys ready to rock and roll. And they just looked kind of sloppy, some turnovers. Will Howard didn't look great. He did enough, but it was really the Buckeye defense that I felt like kept them in this game and ultimately got them the win with the late interception. And then, we're going to find out next week if Ohio State is really legit. They go on the road to Happy Valley. They also face Indiana in these last 4 weeks of the season. So they still have a long way to go, but I guess that poses the question are they as legit as we think they are, or do we think they're going to trip up in the next couple weeks?
Yeah, Ohio State has a tough remaining schedule. That being said, I do expect the Ducks to match up with them again in the Big Ten championship game. That defense is legit, and I think although they sort of stumbled last week, I think that game last week proved how legit that defense is. Ohio State was only able to put up 21 points, but the defense was able to sort of make up for the offense's miscues and hold that team under 20 points. And I think that defense will remain consistent throughout the year. And Will Howard has all the weapons around him to where he doesn't have to be great. He just sort of has to distribute the ball. Ohio State's going to put up points. Their defense is going to play well. And so that consistency, I think, will carry them to the Big Ten championship game where I expect them to match up with Oregon. Obviously, Penn State, will be a tough opponent for them, along with Indiana. But in both cases, I think both those teams are great. Penn State, particularly. That being said, if the ball is in Drew Allar's hands and he needs to go win a game, I don't know that all my confidence is behind him. So I expect to match up with Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game here, in a month or so.
I like that you brought up the Penn State game just because it feels like this year there's kind of a different vibe around this team. The last 3 or 4 seasons, it's been, can Penn State win this big game? Like they possibly might be able to beat Ohio State and they might be able to beat Michigan. And that's just never been the case. James Franklin, as we know, has had little to no success against top 10 teams during his time in Happy Valley. And I think there's going to be a lot of people this week that are going to say, okay, like this is the time Penn State can get it done. And this is the best chance they are going to have. And I would argue that this is a must-win game for James Franklin. I think when you look at his tenure in Penn State, yes, he's been great. He's won a lot of games, Fiesta Bowl champions when Saquon Barkley was there. But they just haven't had that marquee win. They haven't had that Ohio State win on the road or a big victory like that has propelled them into the playoffs. And so when you look at this, I think a lot of people are going to look at this matchup and say, okay, this is Penn State's chance to win it. But I just don't know that they're going to get it done. Like you said, I think Penn State's offense has taken a jump this year. And I think I like what I've seen from Drew Aller. But I just don't know that they have the weapons offensively. I know their run game is good, but compared to Ohio State, I just don't know if they're going to have the firepower to put up with that Buckeye defense, especially with how good Ohio State's defense has been this year. It'll be interesting to see. I think I like the Buckeyes in that matchup, but we'll have to see how that one plays out. I want to hit on Indiana real quick. They just beat up on my Huskies. There's a lot of hype around this team. Curtis Signetti, probably a candidate for Big Ten Coach of the Year, just with how he's been able to turn around that program. What do you think of this Indiana team? Because I think that they're fun to watch, but I don't know if when push comes to shove, if they're necessarily the team people might think they are.
Yeah, I think that Indiana's pretty consistent on both sides of the ball, but they haven't been tested yet. And I think that just being average, or I shouldn't say average, but not elite on either side of the ball. In order to have success, you have to have like a Heisman contender on your team, and I don't see that. Obviously, their quarterback play has been good so far, but by no means do I think he's a contender for the Heisman Trophy. And so, without having an elite game changer at quarterback and just slightly above average defenses and offenses, at least compared to the rest of the college football playoff field, I don't see this team making much noise as we get farther down the road.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I think when you look at this team, Curtis Rourke has been playing well. I think there's a good vibe to this team. And I think going forward, they will be a threat in the Big Ten. I just think, when you look at their schedule, they have Ohio State still. They have some big games remaining. And I just don't know if they're going to have what it takes to get it done, especially with how bad that thumb injury might be on Curtis Rourke. For those of you that don't know, obviously I'm not a quarterback, but it can be like a thumb plays a big role in whether or not you can be able to throw a football and just the control you have on the ball. And so it'll be interesting to see how big of an effect that has on their offense going forward. So that's going to wrap it up for our college football talk here. We're going to make a change over to the NBA as we've just wrapped up our first week of action in the league. And we're going to be talking about buying and selling stock. Hunter, I know you're a big business guy. We're going to be talking about teams that we want to buy stock in. So who do you like this season? Who do you think is going to make some noise? Then who are we selling stock in? Who do we think is going to have a down year or just trending in the wrong direction? I'm going to let you go first. You're the guest. So who are you buying stock in this season?
Well, my pick should come as no surprise. As much as I hate to say it, I'd love to bash on the reigning champs, but I think the Celtics are looking nasty to begin the season. Obviously, we're only 3 games in. That being said, this Celtics squad is one that ranked near the top in both offensive and defensive efficiency last year, and they essentially returned their entire roster. Age shouldn't play any factor, at least any negative factor. Obviously, Al Horford's getting a little bit older, but the rest of those guys should be entering their prime or are already in it. So I expect this team to, build from where they left off last year, and I could see them being just as dominant, if not more dominant, this year. So that's who I'm buying stock in. It should come as no surprise, but I just think this team is really trending in the right direction. They're here to stay, as much as that pains me to say.
With Kristaps Porzingis having that injury, obviously he's out right now. Do you think that affects his team at all? Obviously, last year he played a pretty big role in that playoff run. He was kind of out for a little bit during the finals, but he played when they needed him the most. If he can't come back in time, or he kind of suffers the injury bug throughout the season, how much do you think that affects his team? Because I think that's kind of an underlying thing that people might overlook in the regular season and say, okay, like once he's back in the playoffs, he'll be good. But just based on what we've seen throughout his career, there's a good chance he comes back for a week and sprains an ankle or something in his leg goes wrong. He's just always had an issue with injuries. And so I just want to get your take on, he's an underlying factor of this team, obviously not at the same level as Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, but he's a significant part of this roster. And so if he can't play, how do you think this Celtic team fares?
I think they'll be all right. Obviously, great player. And he definitely, brings something to the table for the Celtic squad. But looking at the rotation, Missoula has sort of been sticking with this 8-man rotation that was characteristic of the Celtics last year in the playoffs, and he seems to be sticking with it as we enter the regular season now. And to me, it seems like no matter who they sub in, can shoot, and that seems like that's all that matters to them anyway. So obviously, Porzingis can shoot, but Cornet and Al Horford will do just as well knocking down corner threes when they're asked to. Obviously, maybe the defensive side of things drops off a little bit, especially with Al Horford aging. But I don't expect that to be too big of an issue. The other 4 guys will make up for that, as we know. They're a great defensive squad all around, and I don't think Al Horford or any of these other guys that would be in place of Porzingis are going to make any big difference in that. So.
No, yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think the Celtics are a really good team this year. I think they definitely have a solid chance to repeat, as much as it pains us to say that as Heat fans. I think the Celtics are going to be a force to be reckoned with. I'm going to keep it on the East Coast, up in the Northeast area, Atlantic Division. I'm going to go with the Knicks. I really like the Cat trade that they made. I think Karl Anthony Towns really adds a new dimension to this offense. I think last year, obviously having Hartenstein around the rim, he was not a bad rim protector, and he can do some things offensively, but compared to Karl Anthony Towns, Towns is just on a completely new level. Offensively, I know he had some struggles in the Western Conference Finals against the Nuggets, but I just think when you look at this Knicks roster from head to toe, they just have depth and they're tough. I think Jalen Brunson is a great leader for this Knicks team. And then just the dynamic playmakers they have, whether it's Josh Hart or Cat, and even guys like Jalen Brunson that can play a little bit of defense. I just think they're in a really good spot to make some noise here. Even just in what I've seen in the first week, they look strong. They're exciting. I think Madison Square Garden has now become a place that is tough to play for opponents. Before, it just kind of seemed like it was just a cool, fun environment. But now that the Knicks are legit, I think that's going to be a hard place for teams to come in there and win games. So I like the Knicks to make some noise this year. I think if they would have stayed healthy last year, I think they would have had a legit shot at making it to the NBA Finals and knocking off the Celtics. Obviously, that wasn't the case. But I like New York this year. I know New York is always a sports hub that has a lot of hype around their teams. But I do think the Knicks are for real this year, and I expect them, honestly, to be in the Eastern Conference Finals. And if they're playing for an NBA championship, I'm not surprised by that. So shifting it to who we don't like, who are you selling stock in this season?
Yeah, once again, not the hottest of takes, but I'm selling stock in the Los Angeles Clippers. I think the general consensus is that these guys are past their prime, but I'm here to say that they are in an avalanche. They're heading downhill fast. From what I see, the assets that they got rid of in order to acquire James Harden, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard have left them with a roster that's not very deep. They don't have too many scorers. Obviously, they have Powell and Bones Highland, some of these guys, but nobody that really creates. They obviously picked up Kevin Porter Jr. this year, but I'm not too high up on him. I don't think he'll be that much of a difference maker. And looking at Kawhi Leonard, I think it's going to be another Kawhi Leonard year. We're uncertain how many games he's going to play. Everything's sort of in the dark per usual. I'm not sure when we're going to see him again. And for now, that leaves the offense in the hands of James Harden, who also is just as inconsistent when it comes to playing time. Not only to mention, with his age, he's definitely moving past his prime. So I just don't see a world where, as James Harden, as their leading player, can, make anything out of this Clippers team. So I imagine this team's going to start heading downhill pretty fast, and we'll see what's come out of that.
I like that you brought up the Clippers because I think, there might be a chance that Steve Ballmer was almost too excited about this new arena that he kind of forgot to think about what he was doing with the roster. They pretty much make the decision to keep James Harden and Kawhi and let PG walk away to Philly. And I don't know that that was the right move. I think when you look at it, James Harden at this point in his career, you're not going to get a lot of defensive production out of him. I still think he's elite offensively, but we've seen his whole career that he can be elite offensively, and that doesn't necessarily contribute to winning. Now, if Ballmer knows that this isn't going to be a team that's going to win a lot of games, then sure, you're going to want to score a lot of points. You're going to want to put fans in this new arena, and they might be fun to watch. But I think when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, this isn't going to be a Clippers team that is necessarily serious about winning. And like you said with Kawhi, he's just never healthy. And for me, that's unfortunate. I'm a big Kawhi Leonard fan. And we just really haven't been able to see the same version of him that we saw in 2019 with Toronto. And I think going forward, it's just going to be tough for them to win games. And because he's not on the floor, obviously the whole fiasco with Team USA and the Clippers not wanting him to play and whatnot, just kind of a strange scenario with that. And so I think that's a good move to go with the Clippers. I don't think they're a serious contender either. Talked about PG, Paul George. I'm going to go with the team that he's on now, and I'm going to sell stock in the Philadelphia 76ers. I think the time of Joel Embiid and other scorers is over. I just don't think this team is going to be legit this year. We are about 8 days into the regular season, and we're already talking about his lack of availability. And that's just not a good sign for things going forward. Obviously, PG is already out with some injuries as well, and that's just not a good sign for the Sixers. Obviously, I think Tyrese Maxey is a really good player, but I think this might be a season where we're just seeing a lot of good empty stats from him just because of the lack of availability from George and Embiid. And this is my thing with Embiid. When he's on the floor, he's great. And even last year in the first half of the season, the Sixers were one of the best teams in the league. And he's in the MVP conversation. He's the front runner. And all of a sudden he goes down and Philly's season just goes down the drain. So I don't know if it's a mental thing. Like as soon as he suffers any sort of injury, he's like, I can't play. Or if he is really just like physically hurting and he just can't play. I don't understand. Obviously, I don't have the answers to that, but it just seems like he almost avoids the moment. We see this with a lot of NBA guys. We've even seen it in James Harden's career where the moment's just at its biggest and they just kind of shy away or they have an injury and whatever. So I just don't like Philly this year. I understand what Daryl Morey's trying to do with this team, but I just don't like the move. I think Paul George, kind of similar to the Clippers, maybe fun to watch. I think he can still be productive on the defensive end, but they're paying him a lot of money and he's not going to get any younger. And so I can just see this Clippers team suffering a lot of injuries this year. Obviously, you don't want to predict injuries, but as we've seen already, they're already kind of struggling with their health. So I just don't like Philly going forward as a true contender in the East. So we're going to look into some midseason moves here. As we all know, the trade deadline, All-Star Weekend always brings around a lot of rumors about superstars going to different places. The first move that I want to talk about is this potential to Trae Young to our Miami Heat. This was something that I heard earlier this summer on the Bill Simmons podcast where Trae Young could just be a fit in Miami where all he has to do is worry about scoring. He doesn't have to worry about defense because we already know about that Heat culture and just how tough they are on the defensive side of the ball. But this is a Heat team that struggles to score the ball. They don't have a ton of natural scoring. Obviously, Duncan Robinson's a pretty good shooter when he's hot. And Tyler Hero can be streaky at times, but he just hasn't been the caliber of player that they need from him. And so I think Trae Young, when you look at it, Atlanta's not going to be a real contender this year. They're probably going to be a bottom tier team in the East, I would imagine. And so bring him into Miami. He's somewhat tough. He's gritty. I can see him and Jimmy getting along really well. I think it could be a good vibe for this Miami team. So I could see them making a trade, maybe shipping off Duncan and Hero to Atlanta to just try and get a natural score and another all-star caliber player from Miami. So that's my take But what do you see happening at this All-Star trade deadline? Anything massive?
Yeah, real quick, I'd just like to touch on that Trae Young trade. Yeah, following the years from the big three, Miami hasn't been super keen to make these blockbuster moves. Knowing Pat Riley, all that he put in to acquire Terry Rozier last year, excuse me, uh, and we haven't really got to see how that experiment's going to work out yet. The core's only played so many games together, so I just don't see Pat Riley moving on from Terry Rozier quite yet. Not necessarily that Terry Rozier would be included in that package, but I think he's committed to Rozier being the point guard of this team. And so, as much as I'd like to see Trae in a Heat jersey, I just don't know if it's going to happen. But outside of that, a trade that I'm looking at is Lonzo Ball. He's on an expiring contract, and depending on how he performs this year, obviously he's been out for a while. I could see a team that sort of needs some veteran leadership as a backup point guard picking him up, because as we know, when Ball's on the floor, he's very effective. He's a good defensive player. His 3-point shot seems to be developing. Obviously, he has skills passing the ball. So I'm excited to see if Lonzo Ball can sort of return from the. And then I could see, being on an expiring contract and everything, and the Bulls not being in a position to win, that a contender goes out there and tries to get some veteran leadership and some defensive ability as their backup point guard role, or sort of as like a sixth man. So I could see somebody going out and making a trade for Lonzo Ball towards the midseason deadline. And I'm excited to see what happens there.
I think you're onto something there. I think Lonzo's really an interesting guy this season just because we haven't seen him in so long. Obviously, he had all this hype coming into the league, and then it kind of drowned out. And I do think he's a productive player, and he can be, seventh or eighth guy on a championship caliber team. He's just not the guy that obviously, his dad made him out to be coming into the league. But I think you're onto something there. Seeing Lonzo on a contender would be fun. I think that's good for fans and ultimately good for the league. My final move here, I'm looking down in New Orleans. I just see a team that doesn't really have a sense of direction. They have some good talent. DeJounte Murray, who looks like he's going to be out for a little bit of time. Brandon Ingram, Zion. So it's not the lack of talents there. It's just that we hardly ever see them on the floor together. And, Zion's good when he's on the floor. I think he's probably a top 15, 20 player in the league maybe when he's healthy. But we just really haven't seen that much in his career. But I see Brandon Ingram getting shipped off to a contender, kind of similar to Lonzo. Obviously, Brandon Ingram, I think, plays a bigger role in a championship team, but just a guy that can go get a bucket when you need him most. Defensively, you're probably not going to get a lot out of him, but I could see a team like a Milwaukee or a Memphis where if you just need a natural scorer, and if Middleton can't stay healthy or it's not working out with the Dame up north with the Bucks, or if Memphis just needs another guy that can put the ball in the hoop, I think Brandon Ingram's a guy on an expiring contract, so you won't have to worry about paying him a ton of money unless you really want to keep him and sign him to an extension. Could be a fun experiment for the second half of a season for a team that's looking to mix it up. So when I just look at these mid-level teams that are maybe a player or two away from, elevating their squad and being a true contender, I think Brandon Ingram just brings a fresh perspective to a team like that.
Yeah, I agree. Ingram's a solid player and definitely can contribute on the scoring end for a team that needs it. So, yeah, we'll have to see what happens as the season unfolds.
Do you have any other picks before we move on, or are you maxed out with your midseason moves?
I mean, possibly we sort of touched on the success of the Cleveland Cavaliers earlier in the podcast, and the Cavs obviously saw some offensive struggles even into the playoffs last year. So I think we could see Jared Allen move. I'm not super high on that move, but it's a possibility definitely. I think it all comes down to how committed their GM is on this team. Do they see themselves as a contender right now? In which case they need that offensive weapon, and they might pawn off Jared Allen for that, or do they see themselves as somebody as a contender? Maybe 1-2 years down the road. In which case they want to keep Jared Allen for his defensive strengths on the other end of the floor, and try to pick up that extra weapon on offense during the offseason. So I think that's a possibility, but I'm not super high on that trade. We'll see what happens there.
Before we wrap it up here, I just want to talk about our Miami Heat for a little bit. For those who don't know, Hunter and I both grew up big Heat fans. Got to go watch them in the finals a couple years ago in Denver. The one game that they won in the finals. Pretty surreal experience. This Miami team's weird. They didn't make a ton of massive moves. They lose Caleb Martin in the offseason. They bring Haywood Highsmith back. They get Khalil Ware in the draft, a guy that I think has some strong potential, but is definitely a project at the moment. They bring in Terry Rozier, like you said, so no massive moves. Bring a lot of guys back. Seems that Bam is able to shoot the three ball now, which I think opens up this offense a little bit more. But what is the ceiling for this Miami team this year?
I think they can be, a middle of the road playoff team, possibly a 4 or 5 seed. What I see is, this Heat team, in my opinion, can't get any worse than from where they were at the end of last season. Last season, obviously, they were banged up. They made that Terry Rozier trade. The squad didn't really get to play together, build that chemistry. Obviously, Bam got to go over the summer, play with the Olympic squad, which I think can only help them. So I think the Heat can only be better than what they were last year. That being said, without any big off-season moves, I don't know how far this team's going to make it. As a Heat fan, though, I always hold out hope. As long as the Heat are in the playoffs, you never know what can happen. So I expect this team to be in the playoffs, situated in a good spot, and then we'll see what happens. That's sort of, how Heat culture rolls.
Yeah, I'm right with you there. I think, as the regular season plays out, probably a middle of the pack team. Not making too much noise. I'm just kind of consistent, playing tough, just kind of chipping away at things. But I think when you get this team in the postseason, for whatever reason, whether it's playoff Jimmy or Tyler Hero gets hot or whatever undrafted free agent they sign that just turns into the second coming of Michael Jordan, they just seem to find a way to make noise and just cause havoc in the playoffs. And so I think when you look at him, I like the Terry Rozier move. He brings just a kind of a different vibe to the team. He's exciting. It seems like him and Jimmy get along really well, which I think is important. And I think health is just going to be the biggest factor this year. Like you said, banged up last year, stole a game from the Celtics early on in Boston in that first round. And then after that, just pretty downhill. But I think this team is slowly starting to shift from the Jimmy Butler show to the Bam Adebayo show. I think this is Bam's team now. And I think it's kind of about how the other guys can help out. Obviously, Jimmy is more of a vocal leader. But I do think that just in terms of on-the-court play, I think the focus has to turn towards Bam a little bit more just because of how dynamic he's becoming with his offensive skill set. We all know how good he is defensively. But I think this team's fun. I think the biggest thing for them is making a move at the midseason mark. If things aren't going well and Hero's not playing well or Duncan Robinson can't find his shot, I think you kind of have to go all in here in a sense. Obviously, you want to keep your future and put your eggs in the basket going forward a little bit. But Jimmy's not getting any younger. He has some contract conflicts that are going to be coming up if they don't get him on an extension anytime soon. And so like we talked about just a few moments ago, whether it's a Trae Young or a Brandon Ingram, just a natural scorer, it seems like we're always in that conversation to get a guy. We've talked about Donovan Mitchell before, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant even, and we've yet to see any of those big moves really be made since they've got Jimmy. And so I would just like to see, another superstar, see how it goes. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But the East is going to be tough this year, like we've talked about throughout this whole episode. So I think this team could be a contender, but if it starts to go south, I'd like to see him just be aggressive and make a big move, even if it doesn't pay off. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys for watching. This is the second time we've had to record this today. This morning we recorded and it did not get saved for whatever reason. So that was unfortunate. But Hunter, I just want to thank you for coming on, sharing your thoughts. I know it's a big night for you as your Cowboys look to get back on track against San Francisco tonight. I don't think they're going to personally, but wish you the best of luck there. And yeah, dude, just thanks for coming on the pod. We appreciate your time, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and go boys.
Yes, sir. We'll see you guys going forward. This is going to do it for Chop It Up, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.